Hello, family. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also, share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. It was a quiet Saturday morning when the knock came, a patient, respectful rhythm that didn't push, just waited. Vivian had just finished watering the hibiscus shrubs Daisy helped her plant weeks ago. The door creaked open, and there stood Samuel, not with flowers or dramatic declarations, but holding a slim envelope in one hand and a small plush bunny in the other. His face looked different, not tired, but worn with honesty. "I won't stay," he said, eyes not searching hers but resting at her feet. I wanted to give this to Daisy, and this letter, if you'll allow." Vivian took the envelope without touching his fingers. "She's not home," she replied, her voice firm but not cruel. "She's with her aunt." Samuel nodded, stepping back. "Then I'll come another time if you ever allow that," he said. Vivian didn't answer. She shut the door, but not without lingering for a moment, as if hearing echoes of their former life in his silence. Inside, she didn't open the letter immediately. She placed it on the dining table beside the watering can and stared at the inked name. Vivian. Not Viv, not my love, just her full name carefully printed as if he rehearsed the address. Hours passed before she sat down to read it. It wasn't long, no manipulations, no pleas. Just a chronicle of accountability. "I've been going to therapy, not to earn you back, but to understand why I destroyed what I swore to protect. There's no justification for my silence when Clara crept into our home. I don't deserve another chance. But I wanted you to know I'm trying to become a man Daisy won't be ashamed of." Vivian blinked through tears she didn't want to admit were there. He hadn't asked to return. He hadn't even asked to be forgiven. He'd simply come as a father trying to show up in whatever small way she'd allow. And while her heart didn't shift immediately, something inside her, something tightly locked, clicked open just enough to let in a little light. The following Fridays came with a subtle presence. A bouquet of fresh flowers tucked neatly into the black metal gate of Daisy's school. No note, no card. Just stems of sunflowers and hibiscus wrapped in white paper, soft and unassuming. At first, Vivian assumed it was from a schoolmate's parent until Daisy returned one afternoon holding the bouquet like it was sacred. "Mummy, someone's been bringing these every Friday. Miss Ifioma says it's for me." Vivian said nothing, merely nodded and placed them gently into a vase beside Daisy's bedtime shelf. But when the third Friday arrived and the security guard casually remarked, "That quiet man with the glasses brought her flowers again," Vivian's heart clenched. She didn't need to ask who. She knew. It was Samuel's handwriting even in gestures, quiet, persistent, full of regret. Yet he never showed himself. No lurking around the corner. No waiting in his car. Just a routine, a man who wasn't trying to be seen, only trying to be remembered without force. Daisy began to anticipate it. "Will he bring lilies this time?" she once asked, eyes twinkling as she skipped out of class. Vivian watched her daughter's joy bloom like the petals themselves. But joy mixed with confusion when Daisy finally whispered one night before sleep, "Is Daddy trying to say sorry with the flowers?" Vivian tucked her in, smoothing the little girl's curls with a gentle hand. "Maybe," she answered quietly, "but sometimes sorry needs more than flowers." The words weighed heavy in the dark room, and Daisy, young as she was, nodded in that wise way children sometimes do. That night, Vivian stared at the growing row of vases on the window shelf. Each held a part of a broken apology. She didn't know what to do with them, whether to toss them or let them live. But for now, she left them where they stood, each bloom a quiet monument to a man trying, for once, without demanding. And for the first time in months, she didn't resent the gesture. She simply allowed it to be. It wasn't planned. Not really. Vivian had been pruning the small lemon tree in Theodore's garden when she heard the sound of cautious footsteps on gravel. Turning, she saw Samuel standing beyond the wooden arch, not crossing the line between welcome and trespass. In his hand was a simple thermos flask and a jar of Zobo. "I thought maybe, if you were outside, we could have tea," he asked, voice unsure. She considered turning him away, but instead she gestured to the empty bench under the neem tree. 15 minutes, she said. He nodded, sitting on the far edge, placing the flask between them like neutral territory. The air hung between them, thick, silent, full of unsaid things. Vivian poured herself a cup, sipped slowly. It wasn't about the drink. It was about the quiet, about testing how long they could sit without one of them falling apart. After several sips, Samuel finally broke the silence. "Theodore told me you've been doing better," he murmured, not with pride, but with reverence. Vivian nodded. "Healing isn't a ladder. It's a circle. I wake up some days and forget what happened. Other days I wake up and wish I could." Her voice didn't shake, but her hand trembled slightly around the cup. Samuel's eyes dropped to the ground. "I never imagined you'd still talk to me," he admitted. "I didn't come for forgiveness. I came because even if I never get another chance, I wanted to show up differently than I did before." Vivian studied him, not the face she once loved, but the man he was trying to become. She didn't give him an answer. Instead, she poured another cup of tea and placed it between them, not as an invitation, but as an allowance. And they sat like that until the sun dipped behind the garden wall. Two people with bruised hearts and a single, shared silence that spoke more than words ever could. The day of Daisy's 7th birthday arrived with rumbling clouds and soft drizzle that refused to turn into a storm. Vivian had planned a small celebration, just family, a few friends, and quiet laughter. But when she opened the back curtains of the house and stepped onto the deck, she froze. In the garden, lit by string lights and sheltered beneath a handmade waterproof canopy, stood a child-sized reading tent. Inside were beanbags, waterproof books, story flashlights, and a letter tied to the entrance flap. "For Daisy, the brightest chapter of our story. Daddy." Vivian clutched her chest as Daisy squealed and ran outside, barefoot in the rain, crawling into the tent like it was a castle. Samuel was nowhere in sight, but the quiet message rang loud. He knew her daughter. He knew what would make her feel seen, and he had done it without asking for credit. Later that evening, as guests trickled out and the drizzle faded into a cool hush, Vivian stepped into the garden alone. She knelt at the tent and brushed her hand across the flap. It was stitched, handmade, carefully crafted, not by an assistant, but by someone who had spent time thinking. Behind her, Daisy skipped, holding a flashlight. "Can Daddy come next time? Just for cake?" Vivian didn't answer. Her eyes scanned the setup, the tenderness, the precision, the rain-proof thoughtfulness. Somewhere near the gate, Theodore stood with a cup of palm wine, watching but not intruding. He said nothing, but Vivian knew what he would say. "You're allowed to feel." And she did. She felt everything all at once: love, rage, ache, confusion. But above all, she felt movement, like something once frozen had begun to thaw. And for a moment, with her hand on the flap and her daughter laughing behind her, Vivian allowed herself to smile, not for Samuel, but for the way hope sometimes returned in the rain. The air inside Westgate Holdings headquarters buzzed with quiet efficiency as applicants filled the sleek lobby. Resumes clutched tightly, eyes scanning every passing executive for approval. Among them sat Jessica, 28, dark-skinned, with clean-cut braids pulled into a knot in cheekbones that gave her an almost regal edge. Dressed in a crisp black blouse and a midi skirt that hugged her frame modestly, she radiated the calm confidence of someone who already knew she would be chosen. When her turn came, the HR manager barely made it through introductions before Jessica's eloquence stole the room. She spoke with intelligence, humility, and an unsettling level of knowledge about the company's internal operations, claiming she had done thorough research. By the time she exited the panel, 2 of the 4 interviewers had already bookmarked her file. That afternoon, Samuel received a message from the head of HR. "Exceptional candidate, sharp, poised, efficient. Might be good to bring her under your office wing in a junior capacity." He scrolled through the resume. Jessica Adams, a name that meant nothing to him. But something in the presentation caught his attention, how smoothly her recommendations had been worded. The measured but warm tone in her cover letter. He approved her onboarding without a second thought. "Place her near Anita's wing. Let's see how she does," he instructed. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that Jessica had prepared for this moment for months. Her entry wasn't coincidence. It was precise timing. And she wasn't here for a paycheck. She was here for an outcome, patient and smiling. Jessica settled in with quiet grace, learning the layout of the office, memorizing faces and names, and more importantly, understanding the power dynamic between Samuel and his personal assistant, Anita. Anita had been loyal, firm, and straightforward, managing schedules like a fortress and filtering access to Samuel without emotion. But Jessica, unlike Anita, used softness. She asked thoughtful questions, volunteered to stay late, and occasionally brought Samuel tea with short, harmless compliments. "You seem exhausted, sir. If there's anything I can help ease off Anita's plate, I'm happy to assist." At first, Samuel dismissed the offer with a polite smile. But Jessica's timing was always perfect, just when Anita missed a file or when Samuel had a back-to-back meeting. She would step in, clean up the mess, and return to her desk like nothing happened. Then came the misfile incident. A budget proposal was incorrectly submitted to the board. The error traced back to Anita's account. But it was Jessica who discovered it first, weeks ahead of the presentation. She quietly informed Samuel, her voice low and remorseful. "Sir, I didn't want to raise alarms, but I felt you should be aware. I triple-checked it before escalating. It must have been a mix-up, but it's filed under Anita's login." Samuel's brows furrowed. He hadn't doubted Anita in years, but the evidence was there. "I'll have it take a look," he said. Jessica nodded with understanding. "Of course. I only wanted to protect the team's integrity." From that moment, the seed was planted. Doubt, small but firm, and Jessica, ever polite and obedient, watered it quietly every day. An emergency board meeting was called after a sensitive marketing document, marked confidential, leaked outside the company. Fingers pointed swiftly, and digital trails once again led to Anita's login. The IT audit team produced logs, timestamps, and download paths. Anita sat in Samuel's office, shaking. "Sir, I didn't do this. I swear to you I double-checked everything. Someone must have used my account or had access to my system." Samuel sat with his fingers steepled under his chin, struggling. This was the second breach linked to her profile in 2 months. Jessica stood near the corner, quietly tapping notes on a tablet, not looking up. Anita turned to her. "Jessica, you've worked beside me. You know I don't make these kinds of errors." Jessica looked up slowly, then shook her head. I just handle what I'm given, Anita. I never questioned your work." The room fell into silence. Samuel rubbed his forehead. "Anita, you've been here for 5 years, and I've trusted you with my life." His voice cracked slightly. "But this is the company's integrity." Anita's lips quivered. "So that's it? After all I've done?" she whispered. "You'll believe numbers over people?" Samuel didn't respond. A moment later, HR entered with a letter of suspension pending investigation. Anita walked out without another word, but her eyes burned into Jessica as she passed. Jessica remained still, her face calm. Samuel barely looked at her as he sighed. "I'll need a new interim PA. Can you help oversee scheduling until I sort that?" Jessica blinked innocently. "Of course, sir, whatever you need." And just like that, the final piece of her infiltration slid into place, calculated, cold, and unseen. The days grew quieter, but not simpler. While Samuel's weekly gestures continued, birthday cards slipped into Daisy's school bag, quietly settled medical bills, and floral arrangements at the church Vivian occasionally visited. Vivian made no move to draw closer. She acknowledged his gestures with a polite nod or the occasional thank you text, but her responses were dry, like unopened windows in a house filled with air that refused to circulate. Theodore noticed the tension in her spine one evening as they sat under her veranda watching Daisy chase fireflies. "You know," he said gently, "he's walking differently now. Not physically, but in the way a man walks when he's trying not to trip over his past." Vivian exhaled, not answering. Her heart wasn't hardened. It was tired of hoping, of hurting, of being the only one who saw the cracks before they broke her open. "Healing doesn't equal reconciliation, Theo," she finally said. "And closure isn't a door I want to reopen." At the same time, Samuel respected the space, even when it suffocated him. He spoke to Daisy with guarded warmth when he saw her at school events, asking how she was doing with her drawings and whether she was still afraid of thunder. Daisy, careful and mature beyond her years, answered him sweetly but cautiously, watching her mother's face for cues. One evening, after a brief exchange with his daughter outside the gate, Samuel turned to Vivian and simply said, "You don't have to like me again. I just want her to grow up knowing I tried to be present, even if I wasn't always wise." Vivian looked at him then, not as the man who betrayed her, not as the ghost of her grief, but as a deeply flawed father trying to reassemble his broken parts. She didn't respond. But she didn't close the gate immediately either. It was the kind of silence that didn't scream goodbye, but it didn't whisper welcome back either. At Westgate Holdings, Jessica moved with seamless precision. Now officially Samuel's PA, she handled his calendar, correspondence, and even made travel recommendations without waiting to be asked. "Sir, there's an executive leadership conference coming up in Port Harcourt," she mentioned one Monday morning, laying the printed itinerary neatly on his desk. "It includes breakout panels on post-scandal corporate recovery. I thought it might be worth attending." Samuel barely glanced at her. Didn't know that was coming up. "Who's organizing it?" Jessica named the sponsors effortlessly, including a partner firm they'd previously collaborated with. "Already reached out. They'd be happy to have you." "I can finalize logistics," Samuel nodded. "Book it." "No Pierre stunts. Just learning," Jessica smiled. Of course, discretion is key. When she sent him the final confirmation, it came with a subtle add-on. "I thought it might help for me to be there as logistical support. I can liaise with the admin team, ensure no scheduling conflicts, and keep things smooth." Samuel hesitated but shrugged. "Fine. Keep it professional. We're not there to parade titles." Jessica nodded firmly, her tone respectful. "Understood." Behind her calm exterior, her eyes flickered with quiet calculation. She had already reserved her room next door to his, and spoken with the hotel staff under the guise of needing backup access for security concerns. No one questioned her. She was Samuel's PA, and every word she spoke was delivered with clarity and poise. She was positioning the final scene with precision. And no one, not even Samuel, suspected a thing. It was well past midnight. The lights in the executive wing of the hotel had dimmed, and silence blanketed the hallways. Samuel had been half asleep, drifting into slumber after reviewing contracts for the next day, when a soft knock stirred him. Groggy, he reached the door and opened it halfway, only to find Jessica standing there, wrapped in a white bathrobe, a folder pressed tightly to her chest. "I'm sorry to disturb you, sir," she said, her voice low, eyes downcast. "The contract from Yelron Group just got amended. I didn't want to delay your signature. They need confirmation first thing tomorrow, and I thought." She let the sentence hang, as if embarrassed to finish. Samuel blinked. "You couldn't wait till morning?" he asked, keeping the door partially shut. "I tried, but the edits were just finalized." Still half in dream, he opened the door slightly wider, took the file, and skimmed it. "Okay, where do I sign?" She handed him a pen, still standing in the hallway, making no effort to step in. Samuel scribbled his signature and handed the file back. "Thanks," he muttered. "Please don't make late visits a habit." Jessica gave a small apologetic smile. "Of course not, sir, just being thorough." She turned and walked away slowly, glancing briefly over her shoulder, right at the camera hidden behind the vase in the hallway corner. The angle was perfect, her figure in a robe. Samuel in a shirt, barefoot, standing at the door. The story would tell itself. And it would lie in the worst way possible, because it would look just real enough to be believed. Vivian stood by the kitchen window, peeling oranges for Daisy's lunchbox when she heard the knock. It wasn't the kind of knock you responded to casually, more like the knock of finality. She opened the door to a courier holding a slim brown envelope with no return address. "For Mrs. Vivian Aloba," he confirmed, then walked away without waiting for acknowledgement. Inside, she hesitated before opening it. There were no markings, no indication of what lay within. But the moment the contents slid out and landed on the table, her breath caught in her throat. A series of photographs, high resolution, angled with intent. Jessica, in a bathrobe, stepping into a hotel room. Samuel, shirt slightly loose, visible at the door. Another photo, her hand resting on the doorframe, looking back and smiling, not just smiling, smirking, as if she knew she was being watched. Vivian dropped the images as if they'd burned her fingers. She stared out the window, numb. The world around her dimmed into silence. Her lungs fought for breath, her legs refused movement. There was no note, no explanation, only betrayal and glossy finish. She placed one hand over her mouth, suppressing the scream rising in her throat. "He'll never change," she whispered, the words trembling out. All the therapy, all the tears, all the time she'd allowed herself to believe something had shifted, shattered in a moment. Later that evening, as Daisy asked innocently, "Mummy, why are you quiet?" Vivian forced a smile and said, "Just tired, sweetheart." But even as she kissed Daisy's forehead goodnight, her hands shook. The images replayed in her mind like a slow torment, flickers of violation. She didn't cry that night. She just sat in the dark living room with her arms wrapped around herself, the photos on the table in front of her, and the bitter taste of finality sinking deep into her bones. The next day, Samuel's phone lit up with repeated missed calls, not from Vivian, but from Theodore, whose tone when he finally answered was sharp and unforgiving. "What did you do?" Theodore hissed. "What photos are all over town?" Samuel, caught off guard, opened his email and saw the anonymous leak that had already begun spreading across investor forums. His eyes widened. No, this didn't happen. "That's not what, Theo, I swear to you, nothing happened." But the silence on the other end didn't offer relief. Meanwhile, Samuel's own calls to Vivian went unanswered. Messages piled up, "Please talk to me. I didn't touch her. I don't know how this happened. Vivian, please." But her silence became its own kind of screaming. No reply, no read receipts, just an impenetrable wall. Inside her home, Vivian deleted each message after reading. She didn't want to hear his voice. She didn't want to give him another chance to smooth over yet another emotional injury. She replayed the moment he stood outside their home weeks ago, how genuine he'd seemed, how steady, and now it all felt like an illusion. That night, she sat beside Theodore on the couch and let the silence swallow them both. "You okay?" he finally asked. She shook her head. He said he wanted to be someone Daisy could be proud of. And now she'll grow up learning men apologize with flowers while hiding razors behind their backs. Theodore looked at her, but he didn't try to convince her otherwise. Sometimes the only truth that mattered was the one seen through betrayal. "He'll try to explain," he murmured. Vivian leaned back, eyes full of fatigue. "He can explain to himself. I'm done being the listener for broken men." 2 days later, Vivian sat curled up on her sister Amaka's couch, holding a warm mug of cinnamon tea that had long gone cold. Her eyes were puffy, but dry. She had cried it all out the night before and was now staring through the walls, seeing things far beyond the room. "Do you know the worst part?" she asked quietly. Amaka glanced up from her laptop. "That you almost let him in again." Vivian gave a half-laugh, half-sob. "Yes, that I believed in progress. That I thought therapy and time and effort could actually rewire a man's instincts." Amaka got up and sat beside her, pulling her into a one-arm hug. "Some men change," she said softly. "Some pretend to until it's inconvenient." Vivian's face tightened. "I told Daisy people make mistakes. That her dad was trying. I defended him, Amaka. I defended him after what Clara did." Her voice cracked. "Now this?" Amaka didn't interrupt. She knew when to let pain speak in its full voice. Vivian continued, almost to herself, "He'll never change. Even if he tries, something in him doesn't know how to protect peace." Amaka placed her hand gently over Vivian's. "Maybe your gift was never forgiveness. Maybe it's discernment." Vivian let that sit for a while. Outside, the sky rumbled with an incoming storm. "I don't know what to do anymore," she finally whispered. Amaka's response was calm but fierce. "Then don't do anything yet. Rest. Listen, let truth come to you. If Samuel's innocent, it'll reveal itself. If he's not, you've already survived worse." Daisy was lying on the living room floor, legs gently swaying in the air, the crayon clutched in one hand as she tried to copy a flower from the children's nature book Vivian had gotten her. The photos, those horrible images, had been left mistakenly on the edge of the coffee table. Vivian was in the kitchen talking to Amaka when Daisy's soft voice called out, "Mummy?" Vivian walked over, drying her hands. "Yes, sweetie." Daisy turned the photo slightly in her hand. "Why does Auntie Jessica look like she's smiling at the camera?" Her voice was filled with the innocent confusion of a child seeing something that doesn't fit. Vivian froze. She knelt beside her daughter. "What do you mean?" Daisy pointed again, now showing Vivian 2 pictures. "This one. She's looking at someone outside the door." And here, she's not even looking at Daddy. She's looking here. Daisy pointed directly toward the corner of the frame where a blurry figure, perhaps a shadow, seemed to linger. She knew someone was there, Daisy whispered. Didn't she, Mummy? Vivian's fingers trembled as she carefully took the photos, really seeing them for the first time. Daisy's observation pierced through the fog of pain. There was something unnaturally staged about the angles. The way Jessica's body was turned, the deliberate placement of her hand on the doorframe, her head tilted, almost posing. Vivian's mind raced as her eyes widened. This wasn't just coincidence. Someone took these photos knowing exactly what narrative they wanted to create. She sat back, stunned, as Daisy gently leaned on her shoulder. Daddy didn't look happy in them, she said softly. He looked tired, like the day after he helped me fix my bookshelf. Vivian kissed her daughter's forehead, gripping the pictures tighter. Thank you, my darling, she whispered. Daisy didn't know the magnitude of her discovery, but Vivian did. For the first time in days, anger gave way to a sharper emotion, suspicion, the kind that demands truth. And Vivian had just found her reason to dig deeper. Amaka was no stranger to digital manipulation. She ran her own tech design startup and had spent years combing through metadata and security patterns for clients. When Vivian showed her the photos and Daisy's observation, she didn't hesitate. Give me 24 hours, she said, already powering up her laptop. Vivian watched as Amaka uploaded the files into specialized software and ran them through filters that dissected digital timestamps, compression layers, and embedded GPS coordinates. This one, Amaka said, pointing to the image of Jessica at the hotel door, was taken at 1:47 a.m. Not the 9:30 p.m. she said she dropped documents off. And this, she pulled up another, was captured from a hallway security camera, probably bribed from inside. Vivian blinked. You mean this was planned? Amaka nodded grimly. Not just planned. Staged. Someone went through a lot of effort to make sure you saw it, and believed it. They dug deeper into the hotel's internal network using publicly available guest check-ins and social media scraping. Look at this, Amaka said, scrolling to a tagged Instagram story from a hotel cleaner. She got a tip from a fine woman in white robe who said she'd double her pay for some hallway footage. Vivian's chest tightened. Jessica, she said aloud, anger swelling in her voice. That woman came into his life like a breeze, too smooth, too perfect. Amaka leaned forward. I'm going to Port Harcourt. If this woman's still working there, I'll find her. Vivian touched her sister's hand. You don't have to, Amaka gave a small smile. You didn't ask, but I owe you. For the years you covered for me when I made reckless choices. Her expression turned serious. This isn't just about you and Samuel anymore. Someone tried to rewrite your story. I'm going to help take the pen back. Vivian's eyes filled with tears, not from grief, but from a surge of hope she hadn't dared to feel. For the first time since those photos arrived, the path forward was no longer covered in fog. Truth was coming, and she wouldn't be walking toward it alone. 3 days later, Amaka returned from Port Harcourt with her hair tied up in a scarf, a stack of recordings, and fury in her step. She bribed 2 staff, Amaka said without preamble, tossing a flash drive onto Vivian's kitchen table. A cleaner and a night shift front desk clerk. Both of them said the same thing. She wanted her pictures taken while looking as innocent and sensual as possible. Their words, not mine. Vivian covered her mouth, shaking her head. She paid them. Cash, 100,000 naira each. No trail, no phone calls. Just like she knew what she was doing. Amaka inserted the flash drive into her laptop and played the cleaner's recorded voice. She say to snap her from corner, make sure man day inside. She say snap like say we no, but I day smile small. Vivian closed her eyes. Every image replayed now with this revelation, and her chest felt as though a boulder had been lifted, only to be replaced with controlled fire. They listened to every minute of the recordings, compiling time-stamped confirmations and cross-referencing the statements with Jessica's itinerary. Amaka even retrieved camera log records showing Jessica walking around the hotel floors long after hours, clearly out of place. This wasn't desperation, Amaka muttered. This was vengeance. Vivian folded her arms. But for what? What did I ever do to her? The question hung between them like a riddle with no answer. Amaka turned to her slowly. Maybe it wasn't about you. Vivian's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Amaka shook her head. I'm still figuring it out. But something about this woman's pattern feels too targeted, too personal, like she's finishing a job someone else started. Vivian's pulse quickened. You think she's connected to Clara? Amaka didn't answer immediately. She only said, let's find out. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about unraveling a web spun from deeper lies, seeded long before the first knock came at Vivian's door. Samuel hadn't slept well in days. The scandal had drained him, not only in the public eye, but in his heart. His company board was tense, the staff distant, and Vivian had vanished into silence once more. But when he opened the door to his office that afternoon and found Vivian standing there beside Amaka, he nearly dropped his phone. Vivian, he breathed, rising slowly. I swear to you, I didn't touch that woman. Vivian didn't flinch. I know, she said, her voice steady. Samuel stared at her, bewildered. Amaka stepped forward and dropped a folder on his desk. Hotel footage, audio recordings, bribed hotel staff. Jessica planned the whole thing. His hands trembled as he opened the file. His eyes scanned the documents, then the printed screenshots. Oh my God, he whispered, sinking into his chair. She set me up. I thought I was careful, professional. I never let her close. Vivian crossed her arms. She never needed to touch you. She just needed the world to think she did, and me to believe it. Samuel looked up, his face shadowed by pain. I swear on everything, Vivian. I tried to be better. I went to therapy. I even kept my distance, just prayed for a chance to show I could grow into a man worth your forgiveness. His voice cracked, and he gripped the file like a lifeline. But it didn't matter. One woman walks in with a camera, and I'm back to being the villain. Vivian's silence was heavier than anger. You almost lost everything again, she said. And not because of what you did, but because of what you failed to see. Amaka added, you trusted a stranger over your instincts. Samuel nodded slowly, shame spreading like ink. I wanted to believe I was smart enough to spot another Clara. Turns out I wasn't. Vivian took a breath. This isn't about you being smart. It's about you being honest with yourself. With me. With Daisy. She moved toward the door. She's been watching us all. And she's the reason I didn't bury you with those lies. Samuel watched them leave, his throat dry. The truth was finally here, but it had cost them all dearly. That evening, Samuel sat on the floor of the sunroom where Daisy liked to read her storybooks. The setting sun filtered through the glass, casting orange ribbons of light across the floor. Daisy entered cautiously, holding her stuffed bunny, her eyes searching her father's face. Hi, Daddy, she said softly. He looked up, his voice caught in his throat. Hey, sweetheart. He opened his arms and she stepped into them, sitting cross-legged beside him. Mummy told me you didn't do it, the bathrobe lady thing. Samuel exhaled. She's right, I didn't. I was just too stupid to see what was happening. Daisy leaned her head on his arm. You've made a lot of mistakes. I have, he admitted, nodding. Some I can't undo, but I never stopped loving you. Or your mum. Daisy didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached into her little bag and pulled out a drawing. She handed it to him. It showed 3 figures standing beneath a tree. A woman in a dress, a man with a book in hand, and a small girl holding both their hands. I want this to be us, Daisy whispered. Samuel blinked back tears. Me too. Just then, Vivian stood silently in the hallway, listening. Her chest rose and fell with slow, controlled breaths. Watching them didn't make the pain vanish, but it softened it, like a wound learning how to scar without reopening. She stepped forward, placing a tray of water and fruit beside them. Samuel rose to his feet. Thank you, he murmured. Vivian nodded, not meeting his eyes. She's not a child anymore, Samuel. She sees more than we think. Daisy looked up. I'm tired of seeing people lie, she said. Let's not lie anymore, okay? Samuel knelt again, brushing her hair from her face. Never again. Vivian didn't speak. But she didn't walk away either. Instead, she took a seat by the window and watched the sky darken. Sometimes healing doesn't knock, it just walks in slowly and takes its seat without asking. And for the first time in a long time, the silence between them was no longer made of anger. It was made of space, ready to be filled again. It was a breezy Saturday morning when Vivian asked Theodore to walk with her. They strolled through the park near the university, beneath large trees that curved like open arms. For once, she wasn't crying. She wasn't even fighting her emotions. "I used to think healing was like burning a house down and building it fresh," she said, eyes ahead. "But now, I think it's more like learning how to live in a room that caught fire. You clear out the ashes and leave the burn marks where they are, so you remember what it cost you." Theodore nodded. "You've cleared out more than most would dare to." Vivian turned to him. "I still feel pain when I see Samuel. But it's not hate anymore. It's like looking at an old wound and seeing it's finally scabbing over." He gently placed a hand over hers. "That's strength. That's growth." She sighed, letting the wind whip her scarf gently behind her. "You know, I've spent so long trying to prove I wasn't broken that I forgot it's okay to sit with pain." Her eyes moistened. "When I stopped needing revenge, I started wanting peace." Theodore smiled faintly. "Peace fits you better than bitterness ever did." Vivian nodded. "And forgiveness? It's not about him. It's about not letting that pain live rent-free in me anymore." She paused under a baobab tree. "I don't know if I'll love Samuel again, but I know I don't want Daisy to grow up thinking love is either suffering or silence." Theodore's voice softened. "Then give her a version of love that teaches her how to speak and still feel safe." Vivian looked toward the sunlight breaking through the trees. "Maybe that's what this whole mess was for. To teach me that my strength isn't in how long I held on, but in how I learned to let go." And in that quiet moment between two friends, with no dramatic outburst or symbolic gesture, Vivian made the softest yet boldest decision she had made in months. She wasn't waiting for an apology. She wasn't seeking perfect. She was walking forward, with or without certainty, because peace was finally louder than pain. The Sunday afternoon air was mild, with soft golden light spilling into Vivian's garden. The scent of hibiscus wafted lazily through the hedges as Samuel arrived. No flowers this time, no grand gesture. Just himself, dressed simply in a linen shirt and dark trousers, holding a book for Daisy in one hand and a small tray of lemon cookies in the other. Vivian was already seated under the garden umbrella, flipping through a magazine, but she looked up when she heard the latch click. She didn't rise, but she didn't send him away either. "I wasn't expecting visitors," she said coolly. "Then I'll stay only as long as your comfort allows," he replied, placing the tray on the table. Daisy's laughter from inside floated through the air like a fragile thread pulling them together. "She's been waiting for you," Vivian admitted after a beat. "Not sure I was." Samuel sat across from her, folding his hands over his lap. "I'm not asking for your trust overnight, Vivian. I'm asking for the chance to share the same air without guilt choking us both." She studied him. There was no desperation in his tone, just humility. He glanced at the cookies. "I baked them myself. Don't laugh if they're terrible." Vivian took one, examined it, then took a bite. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Edible," she said. He smiled. Progress. Moments later, Daisy burst out of the house, holding a drawing of the family tree her school had asked her to complete. "Look, there's Mommy and Daddy and me under the orange tree." She showed it to Samuel, then looked at her mom. "Can we all sit here together? Just for a little?" Vivian hesitated, but nodded. As the three sat under the spreading arms of the umbrella, something shifted. Not healed, not perfect, but the bitterness had lost its grip, and for the first time, their silence didn't feel like distance. It felt like calm. The following Monday, Samuel arrived at his office to find Jessica's desk empty. Her chair was pushed in neatly, her desk cleared of every personal item. A sealed envelope lay in the center, addressed simply to Mr. Samuel O. Daniels. His heart quickened as he opened it. Inside was a resignation letter, coldly formal, effective immediately. No forwarding address, no reason stated. Just a single sentence beneath the closing. "Thank you for the opportunity. I have completed what I came to do." Samuel's pulse thudded in his ears. He called human resources immediately, demanding to know where she had gone. "She said she had to return to care for her sister," they replied. "Left without taking her final pay." His instincts screamed. The dots hadn't connected yet, but something about her silence rang louder than words ever could. By noon, Samuel was in Theodore's office, pacing. "She disappeared," he said, eyes darting. No word, just vanished. Theodore frowned. That's not how regular people quit. He flipped open his laptop. Give me her full name again. As they dug into records and contacts, they found very little, only a local reference letter from a now-defunct firm, no solid ID photos, no family listed. It was as if Jessica had arrived from thin air and vanished into it. You think she was planted? Samuel asked, the color draining from his face. Not by chance, Theodore muttered. She knew how to mirror trust, manipulate perception, and vanish with perfect timing. That's strategy. Samuel leaned against the table, shaken. What if she wasn't acting alone? Theodore looked at him, something cold setting into his expression. Then it's not over, Samuel. It just changed shape. Outside the glass wall of the office, the city moved on. But inside, something darker had begun to take root, the quiet, horrifying truth that whatever Clara had started might still be in motion. In the dim, humid air of the prison visitation room, Clara sat with her back straight and her face unreadable. The scars across her cheek had hardened into permanence, her once vibrant eyes dulled by months of confinement and quiet rage. The metal door creaked open, and in stepped a tall woman in a black trench coat, sunglasses shielding most of her face. The guard followed closely behind, confused. She's not on the list, he said. She has clearance from Abuja, Clara responded coolly without turning. The woman sat across from her, removed her glasses slowly, and leaned in. Clara's lips parted slightly, not in fear, but in recognition. You came, she said. The woman nodded. I always come, eventually. They sat in silence for a moment, studying each other. So, Clara said, her voice low. Was it worth it? Jessica, now fully unmasked, folded her hands on the metal table. Almost. He didn't fall, but it cracked something. Clara leaned forward. Vivian? Still standing, but not as untouched as before, Jessica replied, voice as even as a blade. Clara's expression twitched, the corners of her mouth twitching into the faintest of smirks. Then you failed. No, Jessica said calmly. I learned what you didn't. Poison doesn't always need to work to spread. Sometimes, suspicion does the work better than acid ever could. Clara sat back thinking, You're still as cold as our father. Jessica's jaw tightened. He taught us survival. You taught me vengeance. Now I write the rest. Clara chuckled bitterly. Just don't write yourself into a cell beside me. Jessica's eyes gleamed. I never repeat mistakes. Just evolve them. Behind the one-way glass, no one heard the final words they whispered to each other. But inside that room, a legacy of hidden warfare between women, one scarred by betrayal, the other cloaked in strategy, had only just begun to rewrite its terms. The room was heavy with unsaid things. Clara, leaning slightly forward in her prison seat, laced her scarred fingers together as she watched her sister. When you applied for the job, did he recognize you? Jessica shook her head with a hint of amusement. No. To Samuel, I was just another competent, well-spoken assistant. And I stayed that way until the night in Port Harcourt. Clara's eyes narrowed. You really walked into his hotel room in a bathrobe? Yes, Jessica replied plainly. He didn't touch me. He barely looked at me. But the images were taken exactly as planned. Angles, shadows, timed smiles. I needed the wife to believe it, not him. Clara scoffed. And did she? Jessica gave a one-shouldered shrug. For a while. But that daughter of theirs, she's sharper than anyone expected. Clara's eyes gleamed. Daisy. The name hissed from her mouth like a curse. The little brat always noticed too much. Jessica leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. She's not the brat. She's the spine of that family. The mother may carry grace. The father may show guilt. But the child. She's the reason they haven't collapsed. Clara's lips twitched bitterly. So what's next? Jessica's tone turned clinical. We wait. Vivian is forgiving, yes, but trust doesn't regrow in soil that's been salted. I planted enough doubt to delay their healing. That's still a win. Clara tilted her head. But not the win I wanted. Jessica's voice dropped. You wanted Vivian to suffer. I wanted her to understand that the past she thought was buried still bleeds. A tense silence settled between them before Clara finally said, He told you not to let the world see our pain. Jessica's eyes hardened. And yet here we are, me walking free, you rotting for a crime poorly executed. The jab landed. Clara's hands twitched, but she didn't respond. The air between them had shifted. No longer just sisters in grief, they were co-authors of a twisted legacy neither could quite control. Later that day, Jessica sat alone in the back of a quiet taxi, her trench coat folded neatly beside her. She stared at the blurred buildings of Abuja passing by and allowed her thoughts to drift to the roots of everything. Their father had abandoned them when Jessica was barely 5, leaving Clara, the older sister, to mother her in the most bitter way. They grew up angry, Clara vocal, Jessica calculating. And when their father remarried and built a perfect family, Vivian had been the symbol of everything Jessica never had. Clara's obsession with Samuel wasn't just romantic, it was retribution. "You see her as your enemy," Jessica had once whispered during their teenage years. "But she doesn't even know we exist." Clara's reply had been haunting. "That's why she must lose everything, just like we did." Now, years later, the plan had mutated. Jessica didn't seek attention, love, or even Samuel's downfall. What she wanted was something far more cruel, permanent disruption. She'd watched her sister burn herself with acid meant for another, watched a marriage crack and begin to reform, and had carefully inserted herself into the wreckage like a splinter. But lately, a new thought had begun to fester in Jessica's mind. What if Clara had always exaggerated? What if Samuel and Vivian weren't the shiny picture-perfect puppets of injustice Clara painted them to be? Jessica had seen their daughter's eyes, seen how Vivian responded to betrayal with reflection, not destruction. And Samuel, his guilt wasn't manipulative. It was haunting. Still, Jessica swallowed the thought. Regret was not a luxury she allowed herself. Clara had raised her like a weapon, and weapons didn't get to choose their battles. But something about Daisy's quiet strength had started to peel back layers Jessica had once thought impenetrable. As she reached her rented apartment, she whispered under her breath, "The child didn't save them. She made them undeniable." And that was becoming dangerous. 2 nights later, Jessica returned to the prison under the cover of dusk, this time more composed than ever. Clara sat waiting, eyes burning with a question she didn't ask. Jessica began without prompt. The hotel staff played their part. They paid them in cash. Some barely asked questions. They were told to snap what they saw, no flash. I wore the robe, knocked on his door at midnight with fake urgency. He didn't question it. He was tired. I got the documents signed and left. Clara leaned in, frowning. "And the photographer?" Jessica's lips curled. "A young concierge, desperate for promotion. I promised him leverage. Sent the photos anonymously 3 weeks later with a fake return address." Clara stared at her. "And Vivian believed it?" Jessica nodded. Until Daisy questioned the angle of the pictures. Amaka, Vivian's sister, found metadata in the images. It started unraveling. Clara slammed her palm against the table. "So it's over?" Jessica shook her head. "No. The seed of mistrust has been planted. It may grow back into weeds again. They'll always wonder. He'll always over-explain. She'll always remember." Clara exhaled, her voice laced with fury. "But that's not what we wanted. I wanted collapse." Jessica replied coldly, "Collapse is short-lived. But corrosion, that takes time. It's quieter, deadlier." For a moment, Clara stared at her sister like she no longer recognized her. "You've changed," she whispered. Jessica's voice remained flat. "I had to. You were reckless. I had to be the one who finished clean." Outside the metal walls of the visitation center, a storm began brewing. The sky cracked with the weight of the season changing. Inside, Clara and Jessica sat not just as family, but as remnants of hurt passed down like heirlooms, replaying their version of justice in a world that had already moved on. What neither of them knew was that Daisy, just a child, had already begun rewriting the ending. Jessica had calculated every step, each facial expression, every quiet moment in the office, and every word spoken to Samuel with surgical precision. Yet there was one element no formula could account for: Daisy. The girl had been quiet, but not blind. And it wasn't just the photo angles she noticed. Jessica began to see it in the child's drawings that occasionally floated through the office during her rare visits with her father. There was always a sense of symmetry, balance. Where Vivian was drawn sad, Daisy would shade Samuel holding her hand. When Samuel looked ashamed, she'd draw herself with her arms wrapped around his legs. Jessica stared at one of the drawings Samuel accidentally left on his desk, a picture of a smiling family in a garden. She, the woman in the bathrobe, wasn't in the frame. It wasn't exclusion, it was clarity. The child had drawn a home Jessica could never belong to, no matter how deeply she infiltrated. It wasn't rage that stirred in Jessica. It was something unfamiliar, self-doubt. Back in her apartment, Jessica stared into the mirror, seeing her own reflection morph into Clara's when they were younger, same sharp jawline, same defiant brow. But she had taken a different path. Or had she? Clara had acted out of jealousy, but Jessica acted out of design, yet both had failed. She whispered into the silence. It was the child. She was the hinge, not Vivian, not Samuel. At the prison, during their next meeting, Jessica paced the floor while Clara watched from the other side. "We didn't calculate for innocence," Jessica muttered. Clara snorted. "There's no such thing." Jessica stopped and looked her square in the eyes. "You're wrong. It exists in a child's eyes, in her trust, in how she believes what she sees, because her soul isn't scarred like ours." Clara leaned forward, her voice low and sharp. "Then scar her." Jessica recoiled, and for the first time since this scheme began, a flicker of something like guilt crossed her face. "She's not the enemy," she whispered. But Clara had already leaned back, lips pressed in a smirk. "That's why you'll never win, because your heart still bleeds." Jessica walked out without responding, and this time, she didn't promise she'd return. The air in the visitation lounge was staler than usual. Clara could feel the shift in Jessica's silence. This wasn't the same cold, calculating sister who had walked in with tailored trench coats and perfect timing. Today, Jessica was quieter, measured. She didn't sit immediately. Instead, she stood at the edge of the plastic table and whispered, "We lost." Clara didn't blink. "You lost. I got what I wanted. My face in her nightmares. Samuel begging in court. Vivian in therapy. That's enough." Jessica's voice was nearly a growl. "It's not, because they got back up. You thought if you broke the wife, the family would dissolve. But the daughter stitched them back together." Clara stood slowly, her frame tense. "So now what?" "We walk away." Jessica's fingers traced the table's edge. "No, we make it permanent. We make sure there's no coming back from it this time." Clara's eyes gleamed with approval. "That's more like it." Jessica didn't smile. She simply said, "We need to make it look like an accident, or grief, something believable." Clara's mind was already racing. Her sister, Amaka, she's the wild card. Take her out and the trail gets cold. Jessica shook her head. "No, that's reactionary. Vivian is the heart. If she goes, everything collapses." Clara leaned in, intensity blazing in her scarred face. "And how exactly do you plan to make that happen?" Jessica hesitated, then said, "I have connections, someone in Vivian's building. Security staff, he owes me. One trigger in the elevator, slip in wiring, power cut, no cameras. Could be a technical fault. By the time they investigate." Clara's lips curled into a sinister grin. "Now you're thinking like me." But Jessica's mind was elsewhere. She saw Daisy's face in her mind, bright, innocent, unwavering. And for the first time in her life, Jessica wondered what that girl would become if her mother was taken from her. A voice whispered in her chest, "Don't become what destroyed you." But Clara's voice cut through it, "Do it for us." Jessica nodded mechanically. But as she walked out, the weight of the plan pressed harder than it ever had. Maybe victory had changed shape. Maybe it no longer looked like vengeance, but freedom. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't ready to let go of that child's drawing just yet. Vivian stood at her kitchen counter, stirring tea absent-mindedly as Amaka entered the room, her expression tight. "We need to talk," she said. Vivian looked up, concern instantly blooming. "About what?" Amaka pulled out her laptop and placed it on the table, opening a folder labeled Jessica. "She's not who she says she is. I did a deep trace facial recognition cross-match. Jessica is Clara's sister, real name, Jessica A's." Vivian's breath caught. "You're sure?" Amaka clicked through images, old school records, a blurry childhood photo of two girls beside a woman with tired eyes. Positive. Clara and Jessica share the same mother. Jessica's identity has been altered, but her digital footprint wasn't completely erased. Vivian sat slowly, eyes wide. "She came into Samuel's company. She came into our lives as revenge." Amaka nodded. "And from what I've uncovered through her past transactions and anonymous account trails, that hotel scandal wasn't spontaneous. It was a staged hit on your peace of mind. Vivian gripped the edge of her chair, the cup of tea now cold and untouched. She played us, all of us, including Samuel. Her voice cracked, but she quickly composed herself. Does he know? Amaka shook her head. Not yet. I wanted to tell you first. Vivian stared into nothing, her mind replaying every moment Jessica had been around. Her intelligence, her timing, her silence, it all made sense now. Clara didn't just poison my body, she said softly. She poisoned my life, and her sister tried to poison my peace. Amaka gently placed a hand on her shoulder. What do you want to do? Vivian stood slowly, looking toward Daisy's room. I want to protect my daughter. I want to protect what's left of my joy. Then she added with a quiet fire. But I also want to let them know, this time, they picked the wrong story to rewrite. As she looked out the window, the sun was rising slowly behind the hills. This wasn't just closure. This was the beginning of Vivian's reclaiming. And this time, there would be no bathrobes, no signatures in the dark, just light. The soft scrape of crayon on paper was the only sound in the living room. Daisy sat cross-legged on the rug, her tongue poking from the corner of her mouth in deep focus. Vivian watched from the couch, her fingers lightly pressing the edge of her teacup. The morning sun filtered through gauzy curtains, warming the air with golden stillness. What are you drawing, love? Vivian asked gently. Daisy looked up, her smile innocent but wise beyond her years. Us. She turned the drawing around, 4 figures under a blossoming tree. Vivian, Samuel, Daisy, and Theodore. Each had a name label above their heads in careful handwriting. Vivian felt something flicker in her chest. Why is Uncle Theodore in the picture? Daisy blinked, then shrugged. Because he helps plant the garden. You and Daddy water it. But he makes sure it grows when you're tired. Vivian didn't respond immediately. Instead, she studied the drawing, its softness, its warmth. She hadn't imagined this version of her story. For months, she believed her ending would be defined by betrayal and survival, but somehow, her daughter's perspective rewrote it with peace and shared rebuilding. Later that day, she stepped outside to find Samuel kneeling by the flower bed, soil-streaked gloves on his hands, his expression calm as he worked beside Theodore. Neither man said much, but their coordinated rhythm said enough. Do you need more seeds? She asked quietly. Samuel looked up, his eyes meeting hers. I only planted what Daisy picked out. Theodore handed her a small pot. But we left space for whatever you choose. She took the pot, her fingers trembling slightly, and knelt beside them. Then let's grow it together. There were no grand declarations, just hands in the soil, healing in the air, and a child inside drawing the future she hoped would stay. The flame danced softly as Vivian held the page to the candle, watching the edges darken and curl into ash. The letter had been written in one breath, without pause. Not a rage-fueled tirade, but a calm, searing release. To Clara it began, you tried to poison my body. Your sister tried to poison my trust. But all you truly did was help me discover the boundaries of my strength. She let the letter burn fully in the porcelain bowl, the scent of scorched paper filling the quiet of her study. There would be no confrontation, no last word shared in person. This letter was never meant to be sent. It was meant to end the cycle. Vivian folded her hands on her lap, her mind strangely quiet. In trying to destroy her, they had unintentionally unearthed the version of her she had buried for years. The woman who protected her child fiercely. The woman who chose peace without apology. The woman who rose. Outside, Daisy and Samuel were laughing by the tulip bed, their shoes muddy, their spirits light. Vivian stepped out, her scarf fluttering in the late afternoon breeze. Samuel looked up and reached for the watering can, offering it to her without words. She took it, smiled softly, and began to sprinkle the soil. Daisy beamed. These will be the biggest flowers yet. Theodore appeared at the gate with fresh seedlings and an amused shake of his head. Only if you don't drown them in love, he teased. Vivian chuckled, the sound light and full. As the sun began its descent, the 4 of them stood surrounded by green promises and second chances. There was no need for explanations anymore. Just moments like this, quiet, rooted, and real. And somewhere in a cold prison block, Clara stirred from her bunk as if sensing a chapter had closed. Jessica never came back. Vivian never looked back. And as Daisy's laughter echoed into the dusk, it became clear the final chapter was not about vengeance, but reclamation. Not about what was broken, but what had been rebuilt. Not revenge, not pity, but peace, earned, tended, and blooming with every breath. Here's the inspired Bible verse paraphrased original creation note. This is a paraphrased symbolic verse written in the tone and structure of Scripture to fit the narrative. It draws inspiration from verses like Isaiah 43, verse 2, and Psalm 91, verse 4. Moral of the story: redemption is not earned by gestures, but by consistency. While betrayal may disguise itself as loyalty, truth is patient, it will always rise. And sometimes the most powerful justice is choosing peace over proving yourself right. This moral reflects Samuel's quiet redemption through long-term effort, not words. Vivian's grace and strength, choosing to rebuild rather than retaliate. Daisy's innocence, which ultimately shielded them all. Jessica's deception, showing how bitterness passed down can rot even silent roots. And Clara's final silence, which proves that evil cannot plant seeds of legacy where love already grows. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comment section. Leave a like and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also, share this video to someone who might be interested. Thank you so much for watching.